Eric, next week we're doing something different, right?
Yes. Is it next week? Yes, it is next week.
Will you
So
tell
next
us
week
about
we
that while I organize my thoughts here?
no, that's perfect. So next week we are going to begin intergenerational study on The Chosen. We're going to go through the first season of The Chosen, and we'll watch a little bit of the episode, take a little break, talk about what we've seen, watch the rest of it, and then kind of close out with some additional discussion. So the good thing is what we'll probably end up doing is recording the discussion portion of it, because anybody can watch the video. This we're gonna do season one, which is off of YouTube, so anybody can watch it. And like I said, we'll record the discussion. If you miss an episode, feel free, binge watch whatever you missed, rejoin us, and you'll pick right back up. Now, I was told that the first episode or two is much more historical in nature, so it might be a little dry. So we'll try to liven it up a little bit, at least during the first couple episodes, and then once, of course, once Jesus gets on the scene, then it'll be
Well, then
entertaining. Yeah,
he's the
exactly.
life of the party, right?
You gotta wait for Jesus to show up.
So, Eric, I've not seen The Chosen. Give us a kind of a Cliff's notes on what it's all about.
So basically, what it is, it's a eh, I don't want to call it a historical documentary. Docudrama might be better, but it's based on the historical settings, and they really do a very good job of walking you through the gospel. Um, and I personally have not seen much of it. Pete and Helen have seen all of the seasons, and they say it's just fantastic. So if you don't like what Pete and Helen like, then you may not. No, I'm just kidding. But it's actually won a lot of awards, and it's drawn a lot of praise. So I think it really will be interesting. And depending on how it goes, there's four seasons right now. They're releasing the fourth season in about 2 weeks. So it's been on TV or on gosh, whatever the streaming service that it's currently on. But then they're going to release the DVDs, and I've got the first three seasons on DVD as well. So like I said, so we should have no problem watching them, getting around any of the copyright type issues. But again, we're not going to record the actual streaming portion, but we will record the discussion.
Okay, and Tommy, did you have a comment?
No, no, I was just assuming the chosen, God's chosen people, beginning with the Israelites and then becoming after Jesus, everybody else.
Yeah, so the first couple episodes, and when I say historical, I mean I'm not talking like going all the way back to the beginning, but it kind of sets the stage, and then you get into the birth narratives. And one of the things that they do within the series is they actually blend the gospels together. So you're not going to actually see, oh, this is just what Mark says, or this is just what. So it goes through Jesus's life and ministry, but they blend the gospel so that it's all like a seamless narrative, if that makes sense.
Yeah, they make a storyline out of it.
Exactly, exactly. And like I said, they do a fantastic job with the miracles and some of the other items. So like I said, it should be interesting. Now, I personally haven't completely sorted out who makes it,
Oh,
but it's coming out of Utah, so I'm assuming it's the Mormons.
Mormons.
So that's why I'm so glad Pastor's going to join us, because I really do want to, during the discussion session, make sure that there's anything that's a little bit odd or out of the ordinary. We bring it back to the good Lutheran base.
Yeah, that's why
But
I'm a
actually,
little skeptical and I haven't watched it. But like that Moses one that was on, it's not always the mainline traditional Christian theologians and churches that are producing these things. It's usually a fringe group of some kind trying to get their message out. So I'm always a little skeptical, but yeah, this one's been going for a long time. And that one on Moses was very good once you understood that everything they talked about wasn't biblical, that it was rabbinic, but it was, somewhere. They used rabbinic commentary, all sorts of different things, and they blended all that together. So if you knew that, and you knew that, it's anybody's guess really as far as Moses goes, because we don't have a whole lot of record except for what's
exactly.
And that's kind of sketchy. So yeah, but it's kind of interesting, and it certainly doesn't hurt our faith, and it can enhance our faith too.
Yeah, I don't know if the Mormons would make The Chosen. They have their own series of Bible videos on just Bible.org, that's all it's called, and it's strictly taken verbatim from the New Testament. So
yeah,
it's not like
think the Mormons would do this.
Yeah, I've seen their videos, so I don't know.
Yeah, it's by a group called Angel Studios, but again, I don't know I haven't researched the background of Angel Studios yet.
But I've seen that even in my pastor Facebook groups and stuff. There's praise for it, and nobody's saying what a bunch of hooky, so, or whatever.
Sorry, BibleVideos.org. I said it wrong.
Bible videos.
Anyway, yeah. So I would think that in a case of historical fiction, is that what you're saying? Like they make it a story, but it's based on the characters we have in the New Testament? I haven't really seen
He said it's based on.
No, it's actually based on the gospel, but it's based on a blended gospel. So, because in the gospel, you have basically 4 voices.
Right.
And so, and some of them, in the synoptic portion, they actually tell certain stories slightly differently.
Yes, I've observed
So
that.
this will actually take what you hear in Mark and Luke, and kind of put it together in a seamless narrative, if that makes sense.
It still is just being taken out of the biblical narrative, right? And
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so it doesn't really matter who produces it, because you can't really get it wrong. It's right there scripted for you. So,
Well, that's not exactly 100% true, but I'm hoping in this case it is.
all right,
Because if you've ever watched, like, for example, The Passion.
I actually haven't even seen it.
The Passion of the
Really?
Christ.
You haven't seen The Passion of Christ? Oh my goodness, man, Mel Gibson's amazing. No, but seriously, in terms of that one, there's definitely some stuff that is kind of hidden in the scenes that is a little disturbing at most. Seeing the devil as a baby, that kind of stuff.
Right, stuff that's not actually from the biblical text. That's what I'm getting at.
Exactly, but it's kind of thrown in there as part of the narrative. Now, there are some references within the biblical text for that, but again, it's just not the mainstream type view.
Well, why don't we turn back to Exodus? This is our last meeting of Exodus, and we finished we talked about the 10 Commandments last time. There were a few things that we noted that they're not numbered in the Bible, but they're called the Decalogue, which means 10 words. And so there are various ways of numbering and various ways of considering the commandments. But, and we talked about last time too, that Jesus said, well, there's 2, love God and love your neighbor. And when we teach about the 10 Commandments in the way the Lutherans number them, we say that the first 3 talk about our relationship the first 3 talk about our relationship with God, and the last 7 talk about our relationship with each other. We also talked about how important this was for the Israelites at this time. They're not Israelites yet, but for the Hebrew people following Moses, because they've been slaves, they haven't been responsible for their own actions. Whatever their master told them to do, that's what they did. And so they haven't had to be concerned about whatever laws were and to make moral and ethical judgments for themselves, because that wasn't what their identity was. But now it is. As they head out, what Moses is doing is forming them into a group that has an identity, and who they are depends a lot on their relationship with God, with this one God. And again, coming from Egypt, where the Pharaoh was a god, and then there were a whole bunch of other gods also. The Pharaoh was a living god, so it's just a whole new mindset for them. So they're reshaping the way the people think about themselves and take responsibility for themselves and for their faith, for their relationships. So it's a very, very important step. And we also saw how none of them were anxious to go up the mountain where there was lightning and thunder and a big black cloud hanging over it. They said, Moses, you go on up and then come and tell us what God says. Which was, as it turned out, safe for everybody. So if I remember correctly, we didn't finish chapter 20. We ended at verse 21. So we still have 22 to 26 to go.
Yeah, that's right.
Debate if I need my glasses or not with this. Well, let's see how that works out. Oh, yes. Okay, that's better. Now I can see the little numbers also. So if someone wants to read those verses for us, please. So we're talking about Exodus 20, verses 22 through 26.
I can do that.
Okay.
Verses 20. Okay. And I'm just going to go ahead and read from my Bible. We can always
Yeah, that's a good
notes.
translation. Mhm.
20, starting with verse 20. All right. Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid. God has come to test you, so that the fear of God will be with you, to keep you from sinning." The people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick darkness where God was. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites this. You have seen for yourselves that I have spoken to you from heaven. Do not make any gods to be alongside me. Do not make for yourselves gods of silver or gods of gold." Through 26.
Yes.
"Make an altar of earth for me and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, your sheep and goats and your cattle. Whenever I cause my name to be honored, I will come to you and bless you. If you make an altar of stones for me, do not build it with dressed stones, for you will defile it if you use a tool on it. And do not go up to the altar on steps, lest your nakedness be exposed on it. These are the laws you were set." No,
Okay,
that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Seems to me it would be a lot easier just to end with the 10 commandments, because then now we're getting into all these other laws that are kind of built on the 10 commandments. And we're not going to have time to do all of them. But it is one of the funny things these days where people want to point to the Bible and say, well, what I believe is in the Bible, and I believe in following the laws of the Bible. You have them read the end of Exodus and the book of Numbers and ask them how many of the laws they're actually subscribing to, because there's a whole bunch of them. And one of my favorites to quote to people is, well, it says that you shouldn't boil a kid in its mother's milk. So is that something that that's relevant to you? But
Hopefully that's a goat.
I'm sorry, what?
Hopefully that's a goat.
A kid is a
Yeah,
goat.
I think they're talking about a goat. But it does make people pause. That's all I'm saying. That's my goal. Long enough for me to get away. So we're going to have an altar here. Does this sound like a permanent kind of an altar, or does it sound kind of transitory?
It sounds to me reminiscent of the kind of altars that the patriarchs made, like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when they were traveling and stuff, and they came to a new land, they would want to bless the land, and they would just take stones from the ground and set up an altar. It sounds similar to that, and I think at this point, they're still sort of transient themselves. Like they haven't gotten their inheritances for the tribes yet and settled down yet. So it would seem that this is just something easier for them to do. And I'm wondering why he specifically, if I may ask, told them not to hew the stones or what, not to use tools. And I'm wondering if that it connects with the same commandment that we had earlier about not making images and not bowing to them. Maybe he just didn't want them to even be in the habit. Whereas if they just took earth or naturally shaped stones. It was how God created it, and they're just piling them up. But I don't know.
It seems that way, doesn't it? I don't have an answer for that. But it does sound like it's supposed to be something very natural. And what I was thinking too, something that's transitory.
Yeah.
This isn't going to be forever.
Right.
They can worship there and then move on, exactly like their forefathers did.
Yeah.
I mean, because we're looking at it with 2020 hindsight, we know that they haven't wandered 40 years in the wilderness yet.
Right.
So they may come upon one of these again as they're wandering around. But yeah, that was one of the things that Abraham and Isaac and Jacob did, right? When they were traveling, and if they had a God moment, they built an altar there so they could worship. And the name of that place was such and such. And usually it's also something like it's been hidden to us to this day or something, because we don't know exactly where it is.
Yeah, and he does mention, God says here in verse, the end of 24, I think, he says, in every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and bless you. So these altars have a purpose, and like you just called it a God moment, right? So it sounds like whenever he's revealing something to them or causes something really good to happen, they're going to kind of like commune together or something and commemorate it.
Yeah, celebrate that moment and make something out of it, right?
And of course these altars, these altars are set up to be able to be for whole burnt offerings, sacrifice, and peace offerings. So they got to be big enough to put a whole sheep or a cow on it to burn.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So to me, it's a big fire pit, in terms of let's not think about our altar, at church. Let's think place where peace offerings and whole burnt offerings are done.
Yeah, that's a good point. This is going to be a big slab of some kind, or certainly a table big enough to put an animal on and
burn. So I mean, you got to be able to build a fire and throw an animal on it.
Right.
Notice also that he does actually repeat the commandment, you shall make no gods of silver and no gods of gold, along with what was that, the second?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's basically telling them not to adorn these. They're not going to be putting any statues or anything like that on these altars. It is not supposed to represent any other thing whatsoever, except that moment that they have with God as he's guiding them through this journey.
So in the Lutheran Study Bible, in the footnotes, it says that a whole sacrificial system would be put in place at the Jerusalem temple, but a burnt offering involves sacrificing an animal and offering it to God by burning the entire carcass, causing it to go up in smoke. So it had to be a fire pit.
I guess so. That gives a better description right there, doesn't it?
Go up and
Boy, and think of that would probably take a while
yeah,
too,
probably
wouldn't it?
would.
And a hotter fire. I guess it wasn't a barbecue for everybody. It
Well,
does.
see, so it gives us a little bit about these two types of sacrifices.
Right, yeah, do you want to read that? Because
Yeah,
it's
I
kind of
kinda do.
interesting.
But she could, I mean, she started reading if she just want to finish it.
Barbara, do you want to go?
Oh, let Stephen read it. That's fine.
All right. So right after a burnt offering, meaning go up in smoke, it says, an offering of well-being or a peace offering involved an animal sacrifice and a meal with family members and others in the covenant community. In ancient biblical times, before the temple in Jerusalem became the only site for sacrifices, all meat eaten by people was slaughtered in a sacrificial ritual, such as the offering of well-being. Sounds like a lot of work.
So you didn't just make a couple of steaks for dinner. It
guess
had to
not.
be a sacrificial. You ate meat when you had made a sacrifice to God. And it does talk about that there's a whole system put in place when they have an actual temple. And that, of course, fed the priests too, because
Yeah.
they got those offerings.
Well, that started at when he built the tabernacle, right? I mean, long before they had the actual like, stone temple that Solomon built, they had the tabernacle of Moses.
But they were put in place, right?
I believe so. I believe there's a whole bunch of
It wasn't one
descriptions
that
of it
moves.
actually later on.
Later on, yeah.
Interesting. So mealtime when they had meat there's a lot of Thanksgiving going on there, huh?
Yeah. So why is the Lord requiring of this of the people, do we think? Is there some way that this furthers the cause of building relationship? I'm seeing a little bit of a promise in there that, Stephen, you read it already. In every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and bless you. So it's a promise that God is going to continue to be with them, right?
Yes.
God's not going to abandon them now that they've come out and that they've made it this far.
Okay, but it does seem to be a little bit more than when we just like sit around the table at dinner time and we give thanks for our food.
Right.
It kind of, I mean, it's kind of a big deal.
Intentional.
So I wonder, and he doesn't specify what the blessing is, except he states just before that, I will come to you and bless you. So I wonder if this is just like he's telling them that his presence is still going to continue to abide with them. I mean, before this, they've seen, a big cloud of light, and they've seen, a pillar of fire walking with them. So some pretty obvious things demonstrating his power and presence with them. Even if it seems like he might be toning that down a little bit until we get to like chapter 24, it's he is letting them know, I think, my presence is still with you.
Maybe they won't be seeing him, kind of like what happens with us when Jesus ascends into heaven and then the Holy Spirit comes. You're not going to see me anymore, but I will be with you in the Spirit. And maybe this is the same kind of thing. Don't get nervous and start making silver and gold images.
Right. I'm still with you. Yeah,
to make sure that I'm with you.
Because pretty
I'm
soon
going-
they're actually going to build that tabernacle, and then he's only going to reveal himself inside that tabernacle in the Holy of Holies. So yeah, that makes sense.
Well, I'm using the Message, and it's a little cleaner. Every place where I cause my name to be honored in your worship, I'll be there myself, bless you. So when the children of Israel feel a need to honor
Do a sacrifice.
the God, whether or not Moses has told them he's heard God or they feel it themselves, then when they build the altar and do this, they know God will be there and bless them. So to me, it's kind of setting up a way to bring God in your presence.
Okay.
If you're following the cloud or the pillar of fire, that's a different thing. You see them every day. But if you're trudging through the desert and you're wondering where he is, then you build an altar and know he'll be there and bless you.
Especially as the years go on, right?
Yes.
Whew. So God's going to be with them. As I said, we're coming up into just these laws where things are put into kind of a crazy. Well, let's just read some of them and see what we think. Especially when we live in a time when people keep saying things like, I follow the laws of the Bible. Does somebody want to read 21, starting at the beginning and going through? Well, let's do 6 through 6 to start off with, and I think we'll go kind of quickly through it. But
These are the ordinances that you shall set before them. When you buy a male Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years. But in the 7th, he shall go out a free person without debt. If he comes in single, he should go out single. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master gives him a wife and she bears him sons and daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out alone. But if the slave declares, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out a free person, then his master shall bring him before God. He shall be brought to the door or the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him for life. When a man sells his daughter, no, that's where we want to stop.
let's just stop there for a moment, because we have to address this. You know, when we had slavery in our country, and when there was apartheid in South Africa and things like that, it was built on, they said there are biblical models for this. Now, these are very explicit instructions for when you have a slave.
That was their excuse, in other words.
Well, I'm asking, what do we think about that? So here, it's right here in the
Okay,
Bible.
well, it sounds a little bit more like a bondservant than a slave, like there's some sort of agreement here. Because there's a limit to the time that he serves. He's allowed to have his family. If he comes in with his family, he keeps his family, so they're not separating people.
Unless he's got children.
Well, no, if those children were born to a wife given to him in slavery, specifically, because...
But then they all belong to the master.
Which is still really bizarre to me, and I don't understand it at all. But what we know is this. These people came from a slave society, right? They were delivered from slavery. God introduces himself that way. I am the God who brought you out of the house of slavery, right? So they're still in the process of learning their new identity, right? Pastor Ben keeps explaining they're getting a new identity from God. He's elevating them from where they were, but it doesn't sound like they're 100% different yet. And I don't really know if we can see this is what we have is called the law of Moses. This isn't the 10 Commandments, which applies in force to the whole world for all time. The law of Moses is specifically and explicitly for the tribes of Israel during their sojourn.
Right,
So,
but isn't it interesting that the laws concerning slaves come right after the Decalogue, and then this, you know, how we're going to...
well, it certainly couldn't
Worship
come
God.
beforehand, because there has to be some sort of moral understanding of how to treat people and
Right,
how
I'm
to
just saying that
observe
this
God.
is like the first thing.
I know. And
Instead of your neighbors or...
They're also saying a Hebrew slave. This
Right.
isn't others. This is about, so he's put, it looks to me like rules are being put on, since slavery is the given in the way people deal with each other at this time and place, rules are being put on how you need to deal with it. To us, this is an anathema to even think, oh, okay, so you got slaves, how do you then deal with them correctly? So to me, I see no direction to us in modern times whatsoever here.
right. Thank you for pointing that out, because look, even in the New Testament, right, Peter and Paul both had to address the topic of slavery because it existed, not because God was telling them, I want you to keep slaves. He doesn't say that here. He doesn't say, go buy slaves and go sell people. He's not telling them to do that. He's simply acknowledging this is the way of life right here, so it needs to be orderly, and you have to know how to deal with it. But I don't, like, this is not a law to keep slaves. It is, if these people are going to keep slaves, this is how it's going to be regulated.
Treat them.
And then later on, when you get to Peter and John, or Peter and Paul talking to these people, they also talk to the slaves themselves about how to deal with their relationship with God while they're being ruled over by a master, which kind of interferes with that experience. So I don't think anyone can use the Bible and say it's telling me to keep slaves. That's not what God's doing. He's telling you how to deal with it.
Isn't
I
it?
think one of the important things about this too, and we haven't gotten to the land part yet, or property, that kind of stuff, with the Jubilee year and all that good thing. But I think it's important that he's pretty much setting limits on how long you can actually even keep someone as a slave. And only after that person says, you know what, this is a better life than I'm ever going to have on my own. I want to remain your slave, for indefinite. Only then do they actually get their ears pierced and, are actually shown to be, more of a permanent basis.
Which is an agreement that they've made. See, so these are more like bondservants than actual, like I just captured you, now you have to be my property for the rest of your life. It's not quite the same thing.
And it is interesting, though, that you bring up the Jubilee year, because when we do know that it's part of the commandments that you will remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. We know that's the seventh day, the day that God rested. But as we get deeper and deeper into these laws, we do come up on this Jubilee year, or the year of forgiveness, which is the seventh year. So every 7 years, it's like starting over again. There's a year of laying low and not doing that, and
They do a lot of
releasing
partying
people,
that year.
and I think so. Why not?
Yeah, they'll get back land. They'll have to leave the land fallow for a certain amount of time. So that was, the first time you've heard of crop rotation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's great logic behind some of this, but yeah, so we maybe if we kind of switch eyes and say, what, there were slaves, we say, oh, how compassionately they're treating them, as
Right.
opposed to
Well,
anyone
but
else.
we could reasonably ask the question, and I do. I'm just going to be honest with you. Why didn't God just put a stop to it? Because He identified Himself as, I am the Lord your God who
I
brought
took
you
you out
out
of
of the house of slavery. I'm actually bothered
Except
by
some
this.
of you.
It does.
Well, but
It
there
does
are
bother me, and I'm
people-
not going to pretend it doesn't.
But there are people who didn't have a thing in the world when they came into the world. If you just let them go and they had no food or no way to support themselves, I mean, you that may not be a kind thing to do. I mean, he's telling folks how to take care of these servants
Take care
Right,
of the
because
ones
they
that
have-
haven't
with
made it.
respect.
They
So are
haven't
we-
split their inheritances yet, but eventually all of these people theoretically would get an inheritance.
Mm-hmm.
When, after Joshua finishes all these wars, everyone in the Israelite nation is supposed to have some sort of
Well,
land.
maybe
So-
that's
so how
why
does that?
maybe that's why you put that time limit on there. You can only keep them for 6 years.
Are
For
we
the-
seeing
for the
here-
males?
So how do we explain the next part where they just basically sell their kids? Because it's about to tell us that people are going to sell their kids. He's not saying
All right. Why don't you go ahead and read?
I don't.
The female, it's the females that they're selling and
Okay.
what they're doing with them.
Right.
Well, hold on a second. Don't be going into that stuff. It starts with when you buy a male slave, which means when somebody sold him. Okay, so boys got sold too. We can extrapolate that very logically from the text. It's not about boys or girls; they both get sold, but it's going to happen.
Right, but
But males are let go after 6 years, and females are the owner of the master
Well, probably because they married.
and the children.
It's telling us something. What I'm trying to say here is, I think it's telling us something about how society is already shaping up here.
Yes.
We can't say that this is a day or a week or 2 weeks after they got out of Egypt. We don't know how much time has passed. But I think that what we're reading here is that there's already a structure of society taking place here where there are some haves and have-nots. And
Right.
some people are indentured for one because either they're not able, or because they've done stupid things, or whatever, for whatever reason, they're not able to take care of themselves and their families. And so, and it may be that someone has to sell their daughter. Who wants to read the next verses here to through verse 11.
Starting where?
It's 7
7 through
through
11.
11.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to do it, and this is out of the Message.
Okay.
When a man sells his daughter to be a handmaid, she doesn't go free after 6 years like the men. If she doesn't please her master, her family must buy her back. Her master doesn't have the right to sell her to foreigners since he broke his word to her. If he turns her over to his son, he has to treat her like a daughter. If he marries another woman, she retains all her full rights to meals, clothing, and marital relations. If he won't do any of these three things for her, she goes free for nothing. I think that's
Yep.
Well, the first thing we notice is right off the bat, yours, the Message says handmaid and ours says slave.
That's what I'm saying.
Mine says servant.
Yeah, it's, so you
Oh,
see,
okay.
we have, it may not be quite the same as the way we think of slaves.
Yeah.
Okay, so
So
the
obviously
point,
they're using a word, I don't see here what the word is, but they're using a word that can be translated in several different ways.
which is probably bondservant, because what happens with a bondservant is families make an agreement together where this, this kid's going to do such and such labor for such and such years, and as you notice, they go free without debt. And even the girl, right, if this guy's not going to deal fairly with her, she also gets off the hook and goes out without debt. So, and I think that the reason it mentions that the females don't go free automatically is usually because they're either going to be a wife of the person or their son, in which case, you don't want to break up a family, because that's what you would be doing. And I'm not saying I agree with that system of, well, I don't know, people buy mail order brides, which is weird too, but I guess, I don't know.
Well, I just think it shows a male-dominated society that, in fact, the women's are basically at the beck and call sexually to the male who ends up buying them or whatever. And then if they don't like their sexual relationship, then they get to do whatever they want. But there's some rules around it in terms you can't just throw them by the side. You can have, you can get more wives if you want to, but you got to take care of the one that you don't think satisfies you well enough.
Yeah. And if they release her, the question for me is what happens to her? Because if she's already been with a man or other men, that carries its own stigma with it. Not every, she's not going to be treated as a respected wife by almost any other man in the society, just because of the way that's set up. Yeah.
Okay, but
Sucks
hold on a
to be a
second.
girl, huh?
Hold on a second, though. No, it doesn't. Look, hold on a second. You're not really looking at this. This would have been breaking up a family. You're not talking about letting a maidservant go free. You're talking about breaking a family up. And because look, the guy's not going to want his kids to go wandering off. He had kids with her, so he's going to keep her there, obviously. So we should assume, instead of us assuming that they're going to be treated like crap, instead of us assuming that, why don't we assume that these people are going to be keeping these 10 commandments and treating each other well? Why
We're
should
not
we, why should
assuming,
we,
we're
well,
saying that
aren't
if
you?
he doesn't please himself, now I've had you, but I don't really like you anymore. So here, you're gonna be my son's now.
That
And the
is-
son could say, I don't
weird.
really like her either, so my brother can have her or somebody else can have her. And if we're not taking care of her, then she gets to go out without a debt. She gets to
And
just
no
go
money.
and be free,
Nothing.
but free
Well,
for what?
Yeah, free for what, right? Because she doesn't just go out without, she also goes without payment of money, so she doesn't really have a nest egg either.
And she's damaged goods. She may have already been passed through all the males in a family. Yeah, it's not, it's a tough.
Okay, so the system is it could be abused, obviously. And
You
I don't.
can't sell her to foreign people.
It could definitely. Well, that's nice at least. I mean, but she'll probably want to leave anyway. And go to them
Please,
after getting
sell me
treated
to
that
the
way.
next caravan.
Yeah, she might be like, I'm out of here. But anyway, the point is that yes, the system can be abused, but God isn't the one telling them keep slaves. He just gave them a moral code to live by. That's his commandment. This is how you're going to have to deal with what you people are doing.
So
But
I think one of the important things is, um, and this is happening today in that same area, is basically if you are a woman, a female, the family basically sets up a bride price, and you're paying the family for that woman, whether it's to be married or whatever. I mean, so there's still basically, I hate to say it, selling women, but and that's part of, I guess, the moral obligation of, again, it's not something I agree with, but just that society, you have just paid so many years to raise a daughter who, is not going to be providing for you, is not going to be doing all this other stuff. So hey, you need to compensate me for, this woman that I'm about to give to you. I mean, like I said, it's unfortunate, but that's the way that portion of the world has been forever.
so
And
you're
it's
referring to
hard-
like a bridal dowry or something.
It's hard
like
for
that.
us to even imagine that because we were raised so differently, but it's just ingrained in the culture. And definitely the woman is the man's property, as are the children. They don't.
I don't know. I've read a lot of accounts from women who live in other countries who don't think our way of life actually makes sense.
Oh, yeah, I'm saying
They actually
here.
have a lot of influence over the home. They get their way all the time, and they're happy in their relationships. I don't know. We're reading a lot into this because we see potential for abuse, and there is potential for abuse, but we're assuming that that's going to happen. You
But
don't
it's
know.
the
Well,
same-
some of us know exactly what's going to happen. So
I've been abused.
So, Stephen, I think that if you listen to Lynn Hess's talk about the School of Grace, and if you have heard about these refugee families that come, there was a woman who lost her husband, and she was still bound to his family when they came to Raleigh. And she had to do all the housework. She had to do all the cooking. She had to go out and get work, and she had to figure out how she was going to get her child educated. And Lynn can't give her name because she is under the threat of bodily harm by his family because she left their cultural structure. So, I mean, we are talking about slavery and women, and if you realize that women didn't even get the right to vote in the United States until
No,
1957.
Mexico.
Part of our country's
Oh,
history.
Mexico.
These are my words to think that I agree with this. I myself am not interested in buying a wife, and treating her like property. I'm not saying that I agree with treating women that way. I'm saying that we are making assumptions about them being treated badly when we
But-
don't know that some of these women may have been very happy and enjoyed their life and their relationship.
I think the overall point is a code was created that was expected to be followed, that would let people know where they stood within their culture, and that you can do this and you can't do that.
And
So-
you would know if you weren't being treated according to that code.
Right.
This isn't about whether we think it's good or bad. This is just
We do.
what was laid down at this point in time.
Look at
And
it.
thank goodness, in some places we've moved past it. Some places we have.
Because honestly, we're all recoiling from it. So this
One more thing I want to bring up.
I wanna-
So we heard the message translation, which was my favorite, by the way. Thank you, Tommy. But one of the interesting things is in the NIV, they use a certain word that becomes much more important again later on with subsequent things. And he is not allowed to sell her to foreign people, but he shall let her be redeemed. And that whole redeemer theme is foreshadowing how we were redeemed.
Well, it's
Well-
also looking back to what happened to them coming out of Egypt, right? We had a discussion
Yeah.
about Moses the Redeemer and getting them out of slavery in Egypt.
Ruth was redeemed too. That's
Yeah.
how-
So her kinsman or the family that sold her can redeem her or repurchase her, however you want to put it, which is a good out in a lot of things, and I like to see that, because we don't normally, even in our society, which we think is a little more enlightened, and we don't usually give people that kind of an out. You're going to jail, you can't pay your money, you're going to debtor's prison, you're gonna we usually don't give them that option.
Okay, so we still haven't answered my question. Why didn't God just put a stop to it? Why didn't he?
Put a stop to what?
To slavery at all, for men and women. Why?
Because
That
he's
was
always,
the society.
he's always
Well, I'm not
given
sure I
us-
really understood it.
So
he's always given us the freedom of choice,
Free will.
free will. He's always given us free will.
So
my point is that there are people who were held and actually partly protected by their enslavers, or you couldn't just let them go out in the world and not have some protection. You're talking about
So you're talking
So
about
you're
using a
reimagining-
you're
protective
saying that
system.
that actually was a way of providing a stable life for them. That's what
I'm
you're
just saying that right now we're talking about a whole new way of life.
Right.
And you can't just say, oh, well, we're not supposed to keep slaves anymore, and there you go.
Mm-hmm.
And there is some food provided, there's shelter provided
Right.
when you have a servant. That was my answer to that
No, thank you for
question.
that. Yeah, I missed. Somehow I
Yeah,
didn't
and I
remember
think,
what
you
you
know,
said.
it's
Okay, but
for us sitting here pretty speculative about what,
right, but what you're pointing out is then that it may have been a good deal for some of them, because otherwise they would have just been SOL.
Well, at that point.
Well, the other alternatives, if you owe me $1 million and you're never going to pay it, I'm never going to see it, leave. Or, you're going to turn to a life of crime, which is going to be even worse on society.
Right.
So like I said, but as we've all mentioned, this is a day and age when it was very, very commonplace to have slaves.
Right. That was going on.
for a variety of reasons too, from what
Exactly.
shared with each other. Yeah, and so and I liked what Tommy said a while ago too, that this gives us a standard to measure the slavery by, and it lets you know if you've gone too far or not. There are ways of treating your slaves or servants or bondspeople, and that is what we're talking about here. That's what these laws are about. I see now why we don't make it past a few verses every time.
Yeah. Okay, so how does this apply to us? So we understand that back then, God's given them, he's still trying to elevate their identity. And yes, you're right, he is creating an orderly exodus, because they just came out of slavery. Some of them have nothing. So he's creating an orderly path for them to become a prosperous people. And they're not there yet. They're still wandering around the desert. I get that. What does this mean for us now? Because like you said, people used it as an excuse when it really wasn't necessary. So does your church say that this is still God's laws for you now? Or do you look at the new covenant that Jesus brought as replacing this? Because that's how I do.
So where Luther fell on this was very interesting, because at the time of the Reformation, it was almost like a free for all. Once Luther was excommunicated from the Catholic Church, it was like all the bars are down now. Everybody can do. So the Anabaptists came up. Well, we don't agree about infant baptism. We don't agree that Jesus is really present in the Lord's Supper. We don't agree with this and that. So we started ending up with all of these Protestant, the root word protest,
Right.
the protesters against the Catholic Church, and they all came out. And so many said the Old Testament is no longer relevant.
Well, I'm not saying the Old Testament isn't
But
relevant.
I'm just saying, this is what some said. But Luther stood up against that and said no. And when you read the Small Catechism, which
I just
I know
read
you
it.
you just read it and you've got it, he said no, we have to, the Old Testament is the roots of who we are in our relationship with God, and it informs our faith with Jesus and going forward in our relationship with God. So it was important, and he kept the commandments in there. This is the core of how we are to deal with each other, with God and with each other. So it's important to hold on to these. So
Right,
he
that's-
put the Old Testament in a more elevated place than a lot of the reformers did.
The old right.
But I also think that, in fact, there are those people, or there's those groups within our faith worldwide who say the Bible is inerrant. And I think what we know from just reading this kind of stuff and discussing it is that you got to take it in the context of when it was written. And just like our discussion is, that in fact, that's what happened because of the evolution of our faith. And we can't disregard it, but we also can't go pick and choose a verse that we want to be able to take
Right.
our position and make that be why we say that we can keep slaves around.
Yeah.
Right, and so that's what I'm getting at. Like when Jesus came, he said, "I fulfilled the law," and the law of Moses has to do with all these rituals and all these rules by which they lived in the context of their situation, right? But again, God isn't necessarily commanding do this. He's saying this is how you're going to have to deal with what's already going on, and so. I'm not saying I don't disregard the Old Testament at all. I consider the Old Testament prophets and their prophecies are important. But I'm simply saying that some of these rules and rituals do not really, I don't see how they can apply to us. We are not told, for example, to make sacrifices of animals. In fact, we're explicitly told not to, because Jesus was the final and perfect sacrifice. Some things he simply fulfilled. They're done now. They're in the past. It's not that God changes his mind, it's that he has now elevated us to a new position where certain things are no longer relevant.
Yep, I don't think anybody's arguing against that. That's
I'm just trying to make sure
Yeah.
that,
no.
We're all on the same page, Stephen.
We are
Are we-
all
are
on
we?
the same page. Yep,
okay.
yep. And
It's very close, very close.
We're almost on the same, okay.
no, absolutely. That's so true about what happens with people just picking and choosing,
Yeah,
like I
you're
said,
right.
the laws that they think apply and that they want to use. Not everybody goes back to the stuff in the Old Testament, but even things in the New Testament. I love the one that the reconciling in Christ thing. And she said, why do you think Paul said women shall be silent in church?
Right.
And I can't tell you how many times I've had that
The
said
clobber
to me,
verses, she called
where
them.
I'm preaching somewhere and someone
Yeah, I was actually taught.
women shall be silent in church. Why do you think that is? Well, Jesus allowed women to preach and to be there. Women were preaching in church, so
I was actually taught that was a false translation, that Paul didn't even originally write that.
that could be too.
But anyway, yeah, clobber verses, she called them.
Yep, that was
So
great.
I think that's important because it's important for the man to be able to hear what's going on as well without having the yip 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 yip, and no, I'm just kidding.
Oh, here I was going to wrap it up today because to get into choir, but
I know I was looking around for Holly.
I better-
I was waiting for the book to fly.
It's really
Numbered in his house, so he's.
Yeah, it's real interesting because today in my news feed talked about there is a Senate candidate right now who has been quoted as saying, it's time for us to just quit having women be so yakky yak in the background. And he's running for office for Senate of the United States. Like, what?
and he'll get votes.
He might only get half of the votes then.
If anybody's paying attention.
That's right. No, you're absolutely correct. And that's the problem is most people don't even recognize a name and just say, oh, I'll just choose this. I like this name. I'll just choose that.
They don't even look. Oh,
That's the scary thing.
We need to wrap things up. We've
Yes,
got
ma'am.
choir. We don't have the half-hour grace period we used to. We're starting now. They've already started.
Oh, shoot!
Yeah.
I gotta leave. I'll see you.
Yeah.
We'll see you in a few minutes. But let's pray. Lord, bless us, keep us safe, and use us in your service. Amen.
And
Thank
Amen.
you for being
Thanks.
here.
Thank you, Marsha.
See you soon.
Thanks, Marcia, for filling in.